Good evening, Wake students. I'm Taylor. I'm one of the student directors, and I want to welcome you here tonight. We're in the last week of our series called It's Complicated, right? And to recap where we have been, in week 1, we talked about how despite what culture says, or how we may feel at times, we can ultimately trust in God's design for gender and relationships, as well as trust Him with our desires. And then in week 2, we discussed how to approach relationships and singleness from within a biblical context. And now this week, we will discover that what we do with our body matters, especially when it comes to sex. We are to glorify God with our bodies. Now, as we approach this topic of glorifying God with our bodies sexually, I'm probably stating the obvious, but the biblical view on sex does not complement our culture, right? To say it clashes with our culture is an understatement. We live in a culture that says each person should have bodily autonomy. Each person should have freedom to make whatever decision they want when it comes to their body. And when it comes to sex and our sexual urges and desires, our culture has pushed this idea that it's not that complicated. Do whatever you feel, and that will lead to the most happiness. Act on your impulses, act on your desires, because at the end of the day, sex and sexual activity is just a physical and temporal act. They try to make everything sound simple, but in reality, an operate based off how you feel approach to sex leaves behind a wake of controversy, complications, and hurt. Right? We've seen it on the news, and many of us have probably experienced it, whether through sexual activity with someone else or even by yourself after watching porn. Our culture has a broken approach to sex that doesn't tell the full story. Let me give you an example of this. About a month ago, I went to Cedar Point, and I rode some awesome roller coasters, right? They were so fun. And as I was looking at Steel Vengeance during my 2-hour wait, this dope new coaster made out of wood and steel, I began to look at how complex the design actually was of this coaster. This incredible roller coaster design allowed us to invert like 6 times, go upside down, go down huge drops at 75 miles an hour. Right? That's some serious power. And there's seat belts, safety precautions, and incredible engineering behind all of it. Now that's just not a simple design, that is complex. But typically we aren't thinking about any of that. We just think, hey, that looks fun. I get on the coaster, I ride, I get off, and let's see if we can keep our hands up the whole time. But thank God for all the complexities and engineering going on behind the scenes of the coaster to make it an awesome experience where we don't have to worry about everything just falling apart. Roller coasters are powerful, and that is all the more true of sex. Sex is extremely powerful. And God has given us this incredible gift of sex. And God has given us a very good and simple design for it. Sex is to be enjoyed in the context of marriage between one man and one woman. It is a delight, it is a joy, and it is fun. And He gave us requirements and boundaries for sex because contrary to what culture says, God, the ultimate creator and designer of sex, knows it is more than just a physical and temporal act. Sex engages every part of your body. It engages your will and your mind, your emotions, your desires, your memories, and your soul. At Cedar Point, we operate within the boundaries and parameters that engineers and designers have set for riding roller coasters because we know that if we don't act within it, well, that's when things get dangerous and complicated. Well, all the more we can trust God's design for sex. You know, it can be really easy to get caught up in the way our culture talks about sex and start to think, that makes sense. And we begin questioning God in our head. Like, do you really have my best interests in mind? Will my sexual needs be fulfilled living your way? Or, I've already been sexually active, so what's the point of living differently now? Or what's the point of these boundaries and restrictions? All of these are good questions to be asking. And God, as our loving Father, not only gives us the how for how we are supposed to live sexually, but he gives us the why and the what for. And our scripture tonight will answer many of those questions. Our passage comes from 1 Corinthians 6, 18 through 20. So now you have a chance with your group to break down Paul's instructions to the Corinthians. So let me encourage you to ask questions and share open and honestly. Have a great group.